Podcast Network Asia.
Project Loving Myself podcast is brought to you by Podcast Network Asia and Podmetrics.
We're so hard on ourselves of what society tells us, like you need to do this and do that every single day. And I think just coming back to tuning into, our cyclical nature is the way of peace and harmony with your hormones and just allowing your best self to emerge.
You're listening to Project Loving Myself podcast, a well-being podcast that shares stories of self-love, mental fortitude, and self-discovery. Hosted by life designer and well-being coach, Sanaya Gurnamal.
Hi, I'm Sanaya Gurnamal, and this is the Project Loving Myself podcast. Join me each week as we navigate through aha moments, new ideas, and flashes of insight from candid conversations that inspire you to get started on your own project of loving yourself. Because the most important relationship you will ever have is the relationship that you have with yourself. You matter.
This is Project Loving Myself.
Hello, everyone listening in. Thank you for joining me today on the Project Loving Myself podcast with me, Sanaya Gurnamal. So you know how sometimes we're in a mood and just one word can set us off? We get easily triggered or we may react without thinking. Now, some of you are probably saying, well, that's me all the time. But what I'm really talking about is that time of the month when we are PMSing, about to get our period, and it can sometimes feel like we are just a little bit or perhaps even a lot out of whack. Now, every woman is different, but most women can relate to feelings that are directly linked to their hormones. We may not be aware that these feelings are being triggered by our hormones, but this is why many women go through postpartum blues after giving birth, or even when they hit menopause. It's our hormones. And while they are responsible for a lot of how we feel, we may not understand that our hormones are backstage running the show. So our guest today says, the better you understand yourself, the better you understand others. And one of the best ways to understand ourselves better is by discovering what is going on beneath the surface in our bodies. Pauline Goossens is a hormone cycle researcher and educator, and also a yoga teacher. With a background in pre-med, she switched directions when she realized that she prefers healing by treating root causes more naturally. Like me, she too broke with the status quo and found her own path. After 10 years on birth control, with a year of depression when coming off, among other side effects, Pauline was amazed by how little information that is out there that we are taught about when it comes to how our hormone cycles affect us. And so in that, she found her calling. Since then, she has empowered hundreds of women to create hormone cycle self-awareness to balance their hormones and lives. She is now living in Bali and has created her own style of yoga for women called Om Cycle Yoga, which is yoga for the ovulation menstruation cycle. I think we have a lot to learn about hormones. So let's welcome Pauline onto the show. Hi, Pauline.
Having me. Excited.
Hi, Pauline. Yeah, I'm so happy that you're here. And, I know you're tuning in all the way from Bali. So I'm so happy that we can connect over this platform. Now, Pauline, let's start by talking a little bit about what hormones are in the first place. So I know like everybody knows, sometimes we're hormonal or like our hormones are all over the place. But I don't know if we really understand the concept of what hormones are and what they do in our body. So can we start by sort of getting everyone to a common understanding about hormones?
Yeah, great question. It is something we all hear about, but just have no idea what they actually mean. So hormones are the chemical messengers between the mind and the body. So whenever, let's say, you feel stressed, your adrenals will produce stress, send the signal up to your hypothalamus and your pituitary, up to your brain, basically, to let you know, hey, I'm stressed. Things need to cool down. So that's the messaging system that's working, that our hormones are telling us constantly what to do, what to think, what to eat, what to say, how to react. They're telling us everything. And through symptoms of our emotions, through symptoms of skin issues or PMS, things like that. So our body is constantly telling us what's up.
So Pauline, basically what you're saying is a lot of what we feel can be traced back to the kind of hormone that's being released in our body. For example, when we're stressed, it's cortisol. When we're happy, it could be serotonin, a little bit of adrenaline, and so on. So our hormones and our emotions are directly linked.
Yeah, correct. And within women, we predominantly have estrogen and progesterone. So estrogen is that socializing hormone that makes your brain develop, it makes your bones denser, it makes your muscles gain, it makes you just the best possible person or woman to be fertile. It's making your face symmetrical, it's making you want to go out and meet people. And then we have progesterone, and progesterone is right after ovulation. So I'll go through the 4 phases in just a bit, but progesterone comes from the word to progestate, and progestate is to induce the carrying of a child. So between ovulation and before our period, this luteal phase, our hormones think we're pregnant. So that means that our cortisol naturally rises. So that means we have higher sensitivity. We have a better sense of smell, better sense of taste, touch. Like everything is a little bit more aware and heightened so that you can potentially protect your baby, even if you're not pregnant. It's that cortisol raises all your senses up. And that's why many women might feel irritable or having PMS symptoms, because those hormones are imbalanced. The ratio between estrogen and progesterone are imbalanced. Otherwise, before your period, we shouldn't be feeling pain. PMS is actually abnormal. It's just that we live in a patriarchal society of their hormone cycle, which is 24 hours long, and it's do, keep working the same every single day. But women, we work differently. We have different hormonal cycles that change throughout a month. We have 4 distinct phases.
Okay, so what you're saying now, Pauline, what I'm understanding is we've got the hormones connected to the emotions, but also how they work with each other, the different hormones, affects a lot of things, from our skin, our fertility, our moods, our sense of balance. Like everything is really interconnected. But we don't really talk so much about this, right? Like people don't really understand that there are phases and cycles, and there's a whole lot going on that may be very specific to the female hormone cycle. Okay, so I read that you are a part of a movement to get women to become more aware of their natural biological cycles. So I'm sort of getting the picture. It's about understanding what's going on with us. But why else would it be important for us to really understand what's going on in terms of our hormones, our emotions, and the cycles? Like, what would be the benefit to someone who has no idea what this is and why they would even, want to know about this?
Yeah. So I think it really comes back to tuning in with nature. So when we look at the plants outside, you see that they have a few important goals. It's to get as much sunlight, or that right amount of sunlight, the most amount of nutrition from the soil, just to have the best living environments possible to reproduce.
Okay.
And I think that we forget why we're here as well. Like, humans are nature as well. And so our hormone cycle is all about reproducing. It's making men the 24-hour cycle to produce as much testosterone as possible, to have as many sperm as possible. And for women, we have this 1 egg per month that basically dictate our hormones to make us as fertile as possible. So even if you're not planning to have a child, having optimal fertility or optimal fertile health is the optimal health for a woman.
So it's not about giving birth necessarily. It's just being in that state of fertility means everything is working perfectly, right? Yeah. And it also means we are a lot more balanced.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
But what about the fact that most women are not in that optimal, state? I mean, I know that when I got my period, when I was in my early teens, I remember that it was not something very comfortable. It was associated with a lot of pain. I had a lot of PMS symptoms. And I remember that, as I've grown up through the different experiences in my life, my PMS has changed. And it's never, been like, I would say after pregnancy, it got a lot easier, and it was more cyclical. It was more balanced. So I guess that whole idea of fertility being tied into that, maybe that also has really something, I would say, very important for us to understand. But can you explain why then most of us do not have this optimal cycle? Why are we all going through PMS? Because you mentioned PMS is actually abnormal. We shouldn't be feeling pain. It should be something that's very rhythmic and balanced.
Yeah, for sure. So it's the societies we live in, that pressure, that societal pressure. And, women did have this movement of like, hey, I don't want to start a family right now. I want to also follow my dreams of building a business, or, whatever that may mean to you, where you want to postpone your pregnancy or not have a family at all. But, birth control came into the picture of trying to, delay or suppress fertility so that you can work. And it's true, birth control definitely does that, and it has helped many women, try to focus on their careers. However, birth control suppresses your estrogen. It's synthetic testosterone. So you're just putting in synthetic male hormones within you to be able to work that daily, day-to-day schedule like men do. But that's so against our natural cycle. It suppresses your brain development, so you're not learning as well. It suppresses your bone density, so many women get osteoporosis, in the later years. Estrogen, our natural hormones, are helping us be fertile and be as healthy as possible. So that's why I'm trying to bring this awareness in a different way of empowering women to be able to work with their cycle, because it's so important. Our brains work so differently throughout the cycle. For instance, when we are on a period, our hormones are the lowest out of any other time of the cycle. And then as we go towards ovulation, about 2 weeks later, our estrogen is rising, and that's activating our hypothalamus, which is, or our hippocampus is our long-term memory storage. So that works better during that time. So it's a great time to be learning something new, or speaking up as well, because your verbal skills go higher, your brain skills go higher, your face is more symmetrical. Everything is making you that smarter, more beautiful woman to find that perfect mate to reproduce the perfect baby. And I think we need to remember that this is the natural cycles we live in. However, coming back to the societal pressure, we watch TV that tells us, oh, buy this food, buy that food, that's, fast food, or things that are not nutritionally dense. And, the most food has so many pesticides. We're surrounded by hormone disruptors. The more synthetic material you have, you're wearing, your furniture, all this stuff, these are all hormone disruptors. And this fast fashion, all these things that we're being told is going against our natural selves. So by coming back to nature and wearing and getting as much organic as possible, as natural as possible, you're helping your hormones become more healthy and more in balance. As well as just the careers that we choose. We do go to work every single day. We go to the office 9 to 5, and that's based on the male hormonal cycle. And like I mentioned earlier, our brains change. So we have that, forward thinking mindset right after our period. So it's great to be planning ahead, mind mapping. And then once you're ovulating, you're more desirable to other people. So that's the best time to ask for a promotion, or the best time to record yourself or take a picture of yourself or promote yourself even, because that's the time when you're most attractive to other people and people want, that fertile, healthy woman. So if you have anything to sell, or, presentation to make, this is the time to do it, is when you're ovulating. And then after ovulation, you go into the luteal phase when your mind thinks it's pregnant. So all of a sudden now you're in a very reflective mindset, and you might have you might have negative thought feelings like shame or guilt, but those are things about the past, right? So you know that these are only hormonal because those are the common hormonal thought patterns that happen during this phase. Okay. Same with before, in the follicular phase, when estrogen is rising, it's that forward mindset, that fear that can come up because that's being scared of the future. But now in the luteal phase, you're thinking of the past. And so it's a great time to be reflecting, a great time to be making important decisions when progesterone is up, because progesterone is actually a sedating hormone. So although we have cortisol rising, progesterone sedates you and relaxes you. So we should actually be feeling very relaxed, introverted, and calm before our period instead of having these PMS symptoms. And that could be different with every woman, either that's cramps or skin issues or whatever. But it's your way, your body's way of, for sure.
I read a quote, while I was doing a little bit of research, and I read a quote, and it was like a funny cartoon with a quote, and the woman in the image says, "I just got my period," and I thought, well, that explains everything. Okay, and it's like that kind of like, oh yeah, my moodiness, my crankiness, feeling out of sorts, and it was just because I was getting my period, and that's something I've grown up with. We just expect that, oh, it's that time of the month and you might not really feel like yourself. So you started to talk already, Pauline, about the phases and the cycle, right? So can we now just cover the whole cycle? Can you break it down for us so we can understand? Because what I got so far is before your period is the sort of reflection time. It's the more quiet, it's introspection. Whereas after your period, this is the time where you kind of go out and you express yourself and you're kind of at your best. You're like blooming. So is there more than that? Can you sort of break it down for us?
There's so much more. I could go on for days about this. So yeah, realizing that we are so different and why our hormones are so out of balance, and why we might not realize is that we are living by that male hormonal cycle, and we need to realize that we have these different phases and there are positives to each phase. So when we're menstruating, our hormones are the lowest out of any other time of the cycle. And that really means to restore, regenerate, rejuvenize, just really the time to especially restore with iron, magnesium, and zinc, because that's what we're losing most in our blood. And it's a time when you want to really take it easy and relax and allow yourself to relax and maybe take a day off work. If we overexert our energy during this time, we don't have much energy. So you're depleting yourself of more energy if you're doing too much on your period. Then right after our period, our estrogen starts to rise. And so you realize like, okay, I have a little bit more energy. And you really want to, especially after the couple days of not doing much, you're like, okay, I want to get in and do stuff. Like, I want to do this project, do that. I want to go here, go there. And your mindset is very much in the future. And so it's a great time to be, like I mentioned earlier, mind mapping, scheduling. Your muscle regeneration is quicker during this time. So it's a great time to be working out, build that muscle. Because when we're ovulating, when our estrogen is peaking, the high estrogen actually affects our joints. So it makes it more susceptible to injury. It might make our joints a little bit more swollen. So what I bring into my yoga, the own cycle yoga at least, is to make sure that we flex our feet during ovulation so that we can engage the muscles around our joints to protect them when they're most susceptible to injury.
So Pauline, that means our workouts should actually change according to where we are on our cycle as well.
Yeah, everything. Your body, your brain, your mindset, intentions, everything's need to change about a week interval at a time.
And it's interesting because I remember growing up, the whole sort of marketing and advertising was centered around just because you have your period doesn't mean you have to, you have to slow down, but that take this pill or use this and you will be just like normal. And I remember that was the key message, that don't let your period slow you down or keep you, at home. So what you're saying now is the opposite, that it is a time we should be listening to our body and taking it down a notch. We should be actually not doing way too much than we can handle. So, wow. I mean, that's just getting that is a completely different perspective, because it almost makes it okay when we feel like not doing anything during our period. Because I know I felt that way. I wanted to just kind of be a little bit more calmer and a little bit more introspective. And you're saying, yes, give into that. Amazing. Okay.
Definitely. Yeah. And it's,
all right.
It's tuning in to those feelings. Yeah.
Okay. So you talked about the period and then the ovulation. Go ahead.
Yeah. So you can kind of think of it as seasonal as well. So we have our period as the winter phase, and then the spring phase is when estrogen rises. Summer is when we're ovulating peak, and that's when, you're your brightest blossoming self. And then right after ovulation, we enter the luteal phase. And that luteal autumn phase is very much, when your hormones all of a sudden think you're pregnant. So your cortisol levels naturally rise, heightened sense of awareness, and your intuition is super strong. Because since your hormones think you're pregnant, all of a sudden your number one priority for these about 10 to 14 days is to protect the baby. So all of a sudden we're washing our hands more often. We're wanting to make sure our house is organized a bit more. It's that nesting phase, and you'll see your wallet is being spent more on like home items versus when you're ovulating, you're spending money on like beautifying yourself items. And your digestion goes down during the luteal phase, but your metabolism goes up. And this is why we're more hungry before our period, is because we do need about 300 more calories before our period, because you're feeding the baby. And, you need that extra, you're getting your energy from food during this phase. Whereas in the follicular phase, that springtime phase, we're getting our energy from stored fat. So your body is, prioritizing be as fertile as possible to be the most beautiful, strong, smart woman as possible to find that perfect mate. So you're using stored fat as energy. Whereas in the luteal phase, right before your period, your hormones think you're pregnant. So you're needing that extra food for energy. So your metabolism goes up to let you know, like, okay, eat more. And if you're ever feeling brain fogginess and things like that, just eat, especially healthy fats. And that's another thing that society told us, like, don't eat fats back in the day. Work out on your period. It's like, no, you need healthy fats to make more progesterone, which is sedating you or like making you calm and relaxed to bring your cortisol levels down, your stress levels down, and overexerting your energy. So if you work out too hard, bringing that blood pressure up before your period, you're putting your body in more stress, which turns on fat storage, because your pregnant mind thinks, hold on to the fat to protect the baby. So it's actually turning on fat storage and muscle wasting and bone density loss. And that's the awareness I want to create, is to have that cyclical health for each phase.
It's so interesting, because I think some of this is a little bit intuitive, but we never paid attention. Like, I know that when I work out too close to my period and I work out maybe a little too hard, I'm in pain. I'm in a lot more pain when I get closer to my period. So it's almost like our body was already telling us, don't do this to yourself, right? And I know I've also felt during my period, as I mentioned earlier, it's time to kind of go within, not go out so much. And then after my period's done, I know that feeling also of just feeling like ready to like rock and roll, So I think it's there. We're so out of touch with our body that we've maybe perhaps just forgotten to listen, or we don't even know how. So what would you say, Pauline, would be the best way to start, listening again and starting to understand what's going, because you've given us a lot of information. And I heard you speak at the U Wellbeing Festival as well. And I thought the information was amazing. But it was a lot to sort of process and figure out how to implement into our lives. But I think it's easier when you stop trying to remember or memorize these things, but to just start to go more in tune with what's happening in the body. So what would you say? Like, what would you say about the best way to go about this?
For sure. So like you said, it's a lot of information and listening is definitely a great way. So the best way to start, at least, to make sure that you're listening to your, intuition, let's say, because you have your hormonal self and you have your true self, I like to say. So you have your menstrual self where you're like more mellow and low energy. Then you have your follicular self where you're more like go-getter. And then you have your ovulatory self where you might be interrupting a bit more and wanting all that attention. And then you have your luteal self where you're wanting to be introverted and have more space. So how do we get rid of these like thought patterns and, creating that awareness? So a good way is to track your cycle. The day one of your period, the first day of your period is day one of your cycle. And just notice either in your phone, using a hormone tracking app or a journal, just write down like, okay, I'm thinking, maybe become aware of these thought patterns of like, okay, I'm really wanting to do stuff and be elsewhere. I want to go traveling. I don't want to be here. And for me, I like to practice gratitude during that time because I'm always wanting, grass is greener on the other side. I want to travel instead of being grateful for what's around me right now, for example. So tuning into like, okay, I'm thinking a lot about the future, or before your period, okay, I'm thinking a lot about the past, and realizing that those are your hormones making you think that way, and to disconnect, detach by coming back to center. And you can listen into like, okay, for instance, before your period, I'm hungrier, and what are the healthiest ways to, we might want to go for that chocolate bar, but instead of chocolate where it's full of sugar, and there's a reason why we want chocolate. It's super high in magnesium, which is a muscle relaxant. But chocolate, our typical chocolate bar, is filled with preservatives and sugar and a bunch of chemicals, basically. Go for the darkest possible cacao. And cacao, it's its natural form, and it's super beneficial for you. So we do have reasons for cravings. So when you have a craving, your body's telling you, go for the cacao, don't go for the sugar.
Right.
But so it's tuning into the healthier option, basically.
And anticipating. So knowing, because I always, like right before my period, I was, I'm like chocolate, chocolate, chocolate. And I tell myself it's okay, because it's what I'm craving right now. And for me, just being non-judgmental, not feeling bad or feeling ashamed of not being able to control my cravings was a big step. And I think when I started to understand the hormones and the cravings, what we're looking for and so on, then I was actually able to make healthier decisions because I was able to separate what's me, Sanaya, and what are my cravings? What are my hormones telling me? And then I was able to start to say, okay, well, if I'm craving chocolate, then what I need is this particular like magnesium, or I'm a little low on serotonin. So I do believe that awareness helps us to make better decisions. But how do we keep that flow in our life? Because, okay, tracking our hormone cycle is one thing, right? And it's something that is time consuming, right? And it takes commitment to like watch sort of where we are on that cycle. But is it also kind of connected to the moon cycles? Would that also help to kind of understand what's going on gravitationally around us? And maybe say, okay, well, it's we're in this lunar phase and this is what's going on with me. And this is sort of the feeling or the kind of activity. So is there synergy also happening around us between the environment and us? And can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad you brought that up because, we're very much in tune with nature and we tend to forget that. But like plants, I remember a few months ago, I just found thousands of insect wings that were shed on a full moon night. And I was just like, wow, so beautiful, because the full moon is very representative of letting go. And so you see that these bugs are also letting go of their wings. And women are very much in tune with the moon. As men, they have that 24-hour cycle. They're in tune with the sun. But us women, most women will get their period either on the new moon or the full moon. So notice, actually right now it's new moon. like just right after new moon. So we're going towards full moon for the next 2 weeks about. And so notice that, like, okay, if I am bleeding with the new moon, when the moon and the earth cycles are darkest and introverted, then, you plant a seed with intentions of like, okay, well, what would I like to accomplish or, move towards as my estrogen rises and the moon becomes brighter, so do you, how can I tune in with that? But a lot of women, they don't menstruate with the new moon like the earth cycles. They'll menstruate on the full moon. And women in nature are very supportive of each other. When there's a tense situation, we're here to help and to lower down the tension, basically. So women who are ovulating will have a lot of energy to support the women who are menstruating. And we just go through these different phases. I probably transition between the two once or twice throughout a year, going from new moon to then bleeding with the full moon. And so it doesn't need to necessarily be, perfectly with the new moon. It's just that we all go through different phases of our lives. And if you are bleeding with the full moon, you're there to support other women when they're bleeding with the new moon, for instance. Okay. And so, and it just allows you to support each other and figure out like, okay, I can have my goal for these next phases or cycles is to give more of my skills versus receiving and learning and building my own baby, my business baby or project.
Okay, so new moon generally is the beginning. It's the start of things. It's like the incubation period, right? And it starts with our period. So we kind of start putting our ideas together, but we take it kind of very easy. And as we get out of our period cycle, we're looking to kind of now implement, execute, put things into action because we're already in that phase, right? And then towards the full moon is where things come to fruition. They start to kind of show up in our life. They tend to materialize. The project is coming to completion. So that's generally the cycle we're looking at for most people. Though it could be flipped around, which means you are going into your period right around the time when it's like the completion, the full moon, which in that case, now you switch roles and you're the giver, you're the mother figure, you're the nurturer to other people.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so beautiful.
Yeah. And even when the moon is waning, going from full moon to new moon, that's very much the harvesting and the like I mentioned, the reflecting. You can look back at like what worked well or what didn't work out well, and your brain is most active during this time to think in the past. So it's like, okay, I'm going to let go of shame and guilt and focus on like the lessons I've learned, and harvesting those lessons and reflecting upon them. And it's also when your brain loves to focus on details. So it's editing or, doing your taxes or things that are basically taking the whole past year and you're editing them and kind of analyzing them. So it's a beautiful time as well of the cycle. All phases of the cycle have positives.
And what you're describing now, the harvesting, the sort of that, it's like the cleaning up, it's the reorganizing, all of that is again leading us back to the beginning of the period cycle. Yeah. So it's really, if you look at it, it's actually not so difficult, even though it feels like it's a lot of information to take in. It's not so difficult. It's kind of like you start with your period, go slow, build up, going into kind of the active state. And then when you hit the full moon, which is ovulation, essentially, right? And then after ovulation, now you start to take things down a little bit, get more reflective, more sort of looking at the lessons, understanding everything. How can I do it better? What do I need to change? What do I need to learn? And then you're taking it back down to the beginning of the period cycle.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's really a flow. It makes a lot of sense. And it also kind of makes me think about how to implement this in my life. Because, again, I've grown up where it's like routine, build up a routine, right? every day is trying to find that routine through the whole month. And if I'm going to be cyclical now, that kind of changes everything. How do we continue to work? How do we continue to, give what we're expected to our families, to our careers? Like, how do we do that then, Pauline?
Yeah, that's something I would love to see in the world, especially in the corporate world, of like saying, hey, Pauline is in her follicular phase right now. She's the best for like, scheduling ahead and mind mapping because she has that superpower now, or like Pauline can sell our product during ovulation, or Pauline can, she needs more time or she needs more space from other people and loves to focus on details. So she can focus on editing or analyzing the project we all worked on together, So it's expressing and not having, I think there's a lot of taboo around speaking about our cycles and hormones. And it's just something that we all go through, and it should not be, I think it should be very much well known, and just realizing, especially a lot of people take things less personally because we're all programmed the same way. And it's like, we all need some space sometimes. We all need some like attention at other times. And it's, that working with your rhythms and realizing, even a to-do list. Sometimes I would do this before. I had a massive to-do list and I'm like, I have so much on this to-do list. Like, I need to try to get everything done today. And then you're not like, you don't feel fulfilled by accomplishing them. And then it's still on your to-do list. And so then now I take my to-do list and I'm like, okay, working out, like, is going to go in week 2, like in my follicular phase, because that's a muscle gaining phase. And then doing, for instance, hanging out with my best friend is going to be right before my period, because you want to be surrounding yourself with people who would support you during a potential pregnancy. So that's like close friends and family. Whereas I want to go out and meet people during the follicular phase when I'm extroverted and I want to meet people. And so just my entire life, I base on how to plan with my cycle to make my hormones happy, which in the end makes me happy, and just have a way less stressed life just by planning even my food. Food is very much the 2 top tier things you want to take care of to have balanced hormones are your stress levels and your food, your blood sugar levels. And if those 2 things are out of balance, then it'll trickle down and affect everything else. So my diet is based on the cycle. My exercise routine is based on the cycle. And it just creates such a higher energy state for the whole entire month with no symptoms.
So obviously before all of this, you didn't have this kind of a ritual or practice. And you've already said that the minute you started doing this, you noticed you were less stressed, you were happier, and I think more energy efficient is sort of what I heard you say.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is something now you maintain all the time, Pauline? Like, this is something kind of your regular life?
Yeah. And I would like to say that it's an 80-20% rule. 80%, like, you're doing things that are good for your cycle, and you have enough battery life for 20% of like going to your friend's birthday party when you're on your period. You still want to show up for your best friend for their birthday party, but you're also at the lowest energy, and just allowing her or him to know, like, hey, I'm still going to come, and I still have some energy. I'm just going to chill out and don't take it personally, but I'm just going to be on the couch.
Right. And I think more than that, like more than even what you're going to tell your friend, it's allowing yourself to sit on that couch and be like, well, it's okay that I just don't feel so social, because this is my period cycle. This is the time where I just got to allow myself to be, because that's the cycle I'm in, or that's the part of my cycle I'm in. And I think that's the big realization for me as you're talking, that it's giving yourself the permission not to have to be a certain way all the time, understanding that your cycles, your rhythm changes over the month. And that it's okay to kind of not feel like doing the same things. It's okay not to, be so diligent on the workout, and instead take something a little bit more easy. And I think that is really liberating, when we can kind of not hold ourselves to these expectations that might, be across the month. But Pauline, now for those people who want to start to implement a little bit of this, where should they start? You mentioned food, right? You mentioned that two things, stress levels and food. Tell me about food. How can we do little things with our food to be more in tune with our hormone cycles?
Yeah. So one thing that I work with my clients is that I don't want to change your morals around food. So if you're a vegan and you want to stay vegan, I'm not going to try to, push meat on you. So the number one thing to do in regards to food and to keep your traditions, your local, because we're all over the world listening to this, we all have different dietary restrictions or different foods available in our area. So when we are menstruating, that's really when we lose a lot of magnesium, iron, and zinc. So wherever you are in the world, just look up how to get those sources. Then when we are in the follicular phase, when estrogen is rising towards ovulation, this is the time we really want to be getting in fermented foods because it's the gut healing phase, and omega-3s. Then when we're ovulating, we're naturally the least hungry during this time. Your body's really using stored energy or stored fat for energy.